right, everybody. Welcome to the Gilder Spotlight podcast. Today I have a very exciting guest. Her name is Brittany Fowler. She's currently an executive coach, but she had a very kind of unique start to her career being a teacher. But Brittany, I'd love for you to give a background introduction of yourself and let our audience know who you are.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for having me here. I too have a podcast, so I absolutely love, sharing knowledge with audience members. And I always think too, like with podcasting, and I know I'm supposed to go into my introduction, but just so happy to be here. With podcasting, it's like you think you're going to get something out of it based on the topic you go in for, but I do feel like the audience gets what they need from it. So I'm so happy to be here, so excited. Hello, everybody. My name is Brittany Fowler, and I am an executive career coach, an executive career advisor. I specialize in advising individuals that are at like the vice president or higher, all the way to C-suite. And I coach executives across the country for Fortune 500 companies. And it all started off very young, actually, my teaching slash coaching. I grew up in a family that was big into the performing arts, and my family actually owned a dance studio. And I became a professional choreographer by the age of 14. I traveled the country at 15, and I started getting paid to, be coaching and teaching in the dance realm. And that's what I thought my life was going to be. So I actually went to school for the performing arts, and I got my bachelor's degree in dance. And that was wonderful,
Wow.
but I needed something to do during the day because dance schools don't open until after school. So someone actually had said to me, Brittany, you'd actually be a really good classroom teacher. And I had never thought about it, but it made sense because I was really good at teaching in the dance room setting. So I gave it a shot. I ended up becoming a high school science teacher. I got my bachelor's in secondary education. I ended up getting a master's in communication. And I also ended up getting a master's in leadership. So I am an academic through and through. And I loved teaching. I loved science. I have such a science and math type brain. And I just love teaching all in all. I loved creating lesson plans. I loved having an impact on my students. But I also opened up my own business on the side as a life and spiritual coach. And that really, really took off in a way that I did not expect. So as a life coach, I did not market my services at all. My business spread through word of mouth. And specifically, I was working with really difficult cases, suicidal children, because they did not feel like they belonged on this planet. I dealt with people who were having reoccurring nightmares, individuals or I will say, cancer or post-cancer. I would work with couples who were going through divorce. So my specialty was so like niche in very complex situations. So I was doing that parallel to teaching. COVID hit, and COVID changed everyone's lives, including mine. And it definitely changed my career. I went back to teaching briefly after COVID, and my business just kept excelling. So I had to choose one or the other. And the impact that I had in being able to utilize my skill set to the fullest was just so exemplified with my life coaching business. So I had to leave teaching. I have actually left 3 weeks into a school year. 3 weeks into a school year, I was just like, I cannot imagine myself doing this parallel to my business for another day. So I ended up taking a mental health day one evening, and I never went back. It was a very weird transition. Life is never what you think of it, it never turns out how you imagined it to be. So I never went back to teaching. My business took off, and how I ended up where I am now as an executive career advisor is the vice president of Browning Associates, the organization that I coach for. She was my client, and she came to me for life and spiritual coaching. And her and I connected. We have a lot in common. And she thought, it would be wonderful for you to do this. And I made that connection, and here I am. And that's just like me, Shell.
Very cool. Right now, I want to apologize. My internet went out, and the last thing I heard was 3 weeks in the school year. Um, but I'm sure the recording ended up getting it. So sorry. What did you say after you ended up quitting your job 3 weeks in the school year? I don't know what happened to my
No
Wi-Fi.
worries. 3 weeks.
Um, I will make sure that
Yeah,
it's going to be
no
on.
worries, no worries. So 3 weeks into the school year, I ended up quitting. I took a mental health day,
Mhm,
thinking it was just going to be a mental health
mhm,
day. And that evening, I was like, I'm not going back. And I called the school and I was like, I'm not coming
mhm,
back. And they were blindsided. I was blindsided. I
mhm.
thought that I was going to be teaching forever, but my soul was calling me to something higher. And I took the risk
Mhm.
with just going with my business, sole proprietor. I didn't even have an LLC
Mhm.
established. I was just like, let's just do it.
Wow.
And I did phenomenal.
Wow.
I did amazing. And I'm so proud to say that I started my own business. And how I fell into what I'm doing now is the vice president of Browning Associates, which is the organization that I coach
Mhm,
for. She was my client. She came to me for spiritual coaching. So we made that connection. And
wow.
through networking, I had hopped over and made the switch to become an executive career advisor. I still have my business, but that gets the least amount of my attention because my heart
Mhm.
and soul is into the executives that desperately need my help.
Right.
So, yeah, that is me in a nutshell.
Very cool. I feel like you have a really interesting and eclectic background from being a dance choreographer to a teacher to a life coach to an executive coach. Um, what was that like growing up when you're a choreographer at 14, going to different parts of the country, and how did that help you hone your skills in public speaking, in interpersonal communication, and understanding how to coach? How did that?
Amazing question. When I was younger, my family, I grew up in a very, very confident family. They were
Mhm,
performers, singers, dancers, actors. So I had adults around me that were leading by example. The way that they held themselves, the way that they communicated, the way that they treated people, just everything I had. I need to not get emotional here, but I had such a blessed and privileged upbringing because I grew up in such a well established family. And by well established, I don't mean
mhm,
financially. We were middle class. We didn't have all the extra bells and whistles. When I say established, I mean emotionally sound and true
mhm,
leaders. So I really didn't have a choice but to also adopt that sense of confidence and that sense of self. And when I was that young, doing things at that much of a professional level, it made me sort of different than my peers. And I quickly realized, like, when I was a teenager, I was made fun of a lot for, oh, she thinks she's all that, and I knew that I wasn't. I knew that I was very humble and I treated people with kindness, and I recognized that it was really the people around me who didn't know how to love themselves.
mhm,
That was the essence of why I was so excited to transition in any way that I could to be a coach or a teacher, because it doesn't matter how
mhm.
good you are at something. If you don't love yourself deep down, you are never going to fully enjoy what it is you do for a living and how you can contribute to society. So, because I was so young and I was forced into this role where I had to learn confidence and I had to really be unshakable, because if I was shakable, there was not a chance I was going to be able to help people. So I needed to learn that grit, that emotional grit, and lead
Mhm.
by example, like my parents and my, adults in my life taught me.
Very cool. Yeah, and I also think just like people when you're, 14, 15 doing choreography and having kind of that professional role and you go back to high school, I guarantee you kind of feel like a lot of these, at least for me, I had like some professional internships when I was younger, 15, 16 years old, and then I come back to high school, I'm like, everyone here seems so young and so, I feel like a lot of people in high school are just self-conscious in general, and I think they don't know how to love themselves in general. I think a lot of people kind of learn to love themselves and learn more about themselves throughout their 20s. But what ultimately got you from dance choreography? And I know that you love teaching education, but how did you turn kind of that you said you got a your degree was in communication. How did you turn that into kind of a science and math teaching position
Mm-hmm.
from communication to teaching math and science in high school?
Yeah, another really good question. Um, in order to coach people or teach people to be the best versions of
Mhm.
themselves, you really have to get down to what their passion is. You can
Mhm.
imagine how difficult it is to gain the attention of 28, 18-year-olds sitting in front of you in a science classroom. The last place an 18-year-old wants to be is inside of a classroom. So that was different than when I was teaching inside of a dance classroom because they were all signing up, they wanted to be there.
Mhm.
So having my dance background of understanding that the root of engagement was passion, I translated that over to the high school classroom setting. I had to make sure that I was getting everybody passionate about what they were learning. And communication has everything to do with getting down to the root of people's passion. Because if I can't
Mhm.
communicate to them the why behind this is why we're learning this, this is how these things impact you, this is why these things can matter and will matter to you and your children and their children and their children. So we can't
Right.
invoke passion with people. Therefore, we can't get them engaged if we don't know how to properly communicate. So I would say that that's how I bridge those together.
Ooh, very cool. I really like that's a unique way to answer, and I really think that at least when I had certain classes that I didn't enjoy in college and high school, I would try to find and be passionate about it, especially with like accounting, something that's super cut and dry. But how were you able to instill that passion into something that's so maybe not as fun or entertaining for a lot of the students? How were you able to kind of push that and make them feel passionate about it?
So part of that has to do with my own goals for success. So let me paint a picture here. Everyone who's listening can think back to when they were in high school. You had the teachers who were super unengaging, super boring. They went in for a paycheck and you really got nothing out of the class because that was your class to sort of like catch up on some sleep, or like pass notes to friends. The
Mhm.
teachers that you probably loved were the teachers that kind of just like, talk to you and they didn't really take lesson planning
Right.
too seriously, but they were cool and they were engaging and you could talk to them about life. I didn't want to be either one of those. I wanted to be a teacher who was engaging and inspiring, but held incredibly high expectations because personally, I wanted to see these kids academically grow. So for me, I wanted to be engaging and invoke passion, not because I was the cool young teacher, but because I am actually
Mhm.
really passionate about science. I wanted to bring and share my passion with them and get them engaged. So it's like, I was the teacher that everyone loved for the most part, or but at the same time they were kind of scared. They were scared of me just a little bit. Like when
Right.
the bell rang, we started the lesson. It began. Like cell phones went away,
Mhm.
and I didn't have to reinforce like cell phones away, everybody. Like I just held this high expectation where students wanted to be better. They sat in front of me and they were like, this teacher wants me to be better and I want to perform for myself and I want to perform to meet her expectations. Like it was just such a wonderful dynamic. And I think that when you are an educator or anything you do in your profession, if you fall into this loop of monotony where it's like you clock in and you
Mhm.
clock out, that is a detriment not only to you and your soul, but to the people that you're working with and your community. So it's so important to hold yourself to high expectations because going back to what I said at the beginning, when I was talking about my family members, we are all leading by example. You might not be in a leadership position, but best believe you are leading by example, and how you challenge yourself is going to be what inspires other people to hold themselves accountable for something greater every day.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, very cool. And did your parents kind of instill this type of philosophy of leading by example, pretty much doing 100% everything you do, not showing up to a job for the paycheck, but showing up for the job because you're passionate about it? Was this kind of instilled in your upbringing, in your adolescence?
Yes, because I was surrounded by adults that were doing what they were passionate about. So my parents
Hmm.
never sat me down and said, Brittany, you gotta be passionate in life. You gotta find your passion. They
Yeah.
never sat me down and had these talks. Children will become what they witness. So my parents were leading by example. How? By living out their passions and their work ethic. And most importantly, what I'm proud of with my family is how I watched them treat people. My family didn't care who you were or where you came from. If you were someone in need of money or love or just any type of kindness, my family extended that. So that's probably what kept me so humble my whole life as well, because I advanced really quickly in my
Hmm.
career and with what I was doing. But them leading by example in that way made me realize that my skills are with the purpose of making the community a better place.
And has that kind of always, if someone were to ask you what, when you're like maybe like 14, 15, what was your passion? Would it be different than what it is now?
No, no.
And
Maybe it was, maybe the spotlight was through slightly different lenses. Like back when I was young, I had no idea I was going to be an executive career advisor. That was not something I set out
right.
to do. When I was teaching dance, I really thought like, okay, I'm going to be teaching dance. I'm going to really invest in this. And then when I moved to
Hmm.
teaching, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I'm going to become a college professor. So through every lens of what I was doing, it may have looked slightly different, but my mission was always to inspire people to be the best version of themselves.
I love
Hmm.
that. And to kind of go back to your college life, you said that you had a bunch of different degrees simultaneously as you're teaching and as you're doing all these different endeavors. How were you able to manage your time when you're getting multiple degrees, getting educated, you're working full time? Yeah, what was kind of like the secret to managing your
Yeah,
time?
it's really funny that you mentioned that, because you got to throw into the mix that when I was getting my master's degree in leadership, that was my first master's, I was pregnant with my son, who's
Mhm.
now 8 years old. And then
Oh,
when I got my master's degree in leadership, he was an infant. That I got that, I
mhm.
started that when he was first born, and I never took a break. I did not take a break. So
Mhm.
I did it all back to back. I really love learning. I really love holding myself to very high expectations. And I'm a very disciplined person. Um, and I
Mhm.
think that if you start thinking about how much you have going on, you can easily fall down a slippery slope of making excuses for yourself, not to hold yourself accountable. So, if anyone who's listening out there, if you're juggling a lot, you have to remind yourself that it's temporary. If you're trying to reach a particular
Mhm.
goal, it's temporary, and you will have an opportunity to sigh. But there's always another mountain out there, and I know that. You hit a
Mhm.
mountain, but then you can take a breather for a second, but the next one's there. So I just encourage anyone who's juggling a lot, quote unquote, and trying to manage their time, make sure that your schedule is filled with things that you are passionate about. And the reason I'm saying that as a disclaimer here is because I work with so many executives that are making $500,000 or more as their base salary, and they're not happy. A paycheck does not make you happy. They're not happy because their schedule is filled with things that completely drain their soul. I find it very easy to manage a lot, to prioritize and juggle a lot when your calendar is filled with things that you know are filling your cup and making you better. So that is a disclaimer.
I see. And then, so when you're talking to a lot of executives, I'm assuming that they have hectic schedules, and kind of like what you said, like a lot of these things are kind of draining them. What do you tell them, and how do they make that shift into kind of finding more things in their schedule that will kind of uplift them and feel more passionate about what they're doing?
Oh, your questions are amazing. So that's why executives come to me first and foremost. So Browning Associates is a top to bottom executive career management firm. And we take executives that feel like something's missing. Obviously, it's not the paycheck most of the time, but something's missing in their world. A lot of times, ooh, hear me clearly, audience. Doesn't matter how old you are, hear me clearly. A lot of times, when we fall into monotony and we just go about our day over and over and over, what happens is we start doing things that we are good at, especially as we age. You know, companies really start to see what you're good at and they'll ask you to pick up those things, but we don't keep in mind what we love doing. So executives, by the time they're in their 50s, sometimes, late 50s, they have this job with this wonderful paycheck and they're like, I don't even know how I ended up here. I just kept moving up and up and up in my company. Or, people were grabbing me from other companies. They were recruiting me from all these different places because I'm just really good at doing X, Y, and Z. And I asked them, well, do you love doing X, Y, and Z? And they say, no, I don't. So they unconsciously were allowing their career to spiral into what they thought would be success, which a lot of us think is a paycheck. But then all of a sudden you wake up and, you have high blood pressure. A lot of executives tell me that their wives are on their 4th pregnancy and their wives say to them, I'm going to leave you. One way or another, I'm going to leave you and I'm going to take the kids and we're going to go elsewhere because you are working 60 hours a week and you come home and you're miserable. And I cannot raise my kids like this. And then the executives are like, well, what do I even do? How do I even change this? So if you're listening and you're relating to this because you've fallen into just doing what you're good at, but not necessarily the things that you love, you have to get really honest with yourself about all of your skills, but cherry pick the things that you absolutely love, work with a coach to then brainstorm as to what industries or what types of roles or what types of companies are out there that are looking for a person like you to fulfill all of the things that you love doing.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. And I think just being able to prioritize your passions are, I think, kind of, hit it off the, basically hit it out of the park because yeah, I do agree. There are a lot of executives and a lot of them come home, and it's a big problem in Japan actually the past couple of years is because in Japanese work culture, the guys they're working 60, 70 hours a week and they have a wife and kids. They have no idea what their children are up to and what they're doing. So I really like that sentiment. Well, let's talk a little bit about your time being a nomad. I know that you lived in Thailand for a whole year. What were you doing? I'm assuming you were a teacher. Then after 3 weeks, you wanted your mental health break. And did you end up going to Thailand after that, or kind of how did that all transpire?
Yeah, there are a few parts of the story that are personal that involve people that I don't want to publicly share. But for the sake of telling that story the best that I can with, respecting privacy, I was married at the time. And I had married very, very young. I was 20 when I got engaged. I was 22 when I got married. I got pregnant at 25. And so I was married at this time. And there was just something inside of me that wanted to take my family and try something new. I know that deep down I was searching for something that felt missing for me. And someone had told me about this tiny little island called Kopangan in Thailand. And I thought, I gotta check this out. I knew it was cheap living. I knew it was very peaceful, no crime. And I went and checked it out with my ex-husband. We loved it. And we were like, let's put our house up for sale. We put our house up for sale when we were visiting, and it sold when we were there visiting. So when we came home, our house had sold. We moved everything out. I bought this luxury trailer that I'm sitting in right now. And we sort of like bunked up in here for a little bit and then bought our one-way ticket with 5 suitcases only, my ex-husband, myself, and my then 6-year-old son. And we went there and we bought a house, and I was executive career coaching. I was doing what I am now with Browning Associates, and I was working nights, and it was really, really difficult to work nights. I would clock in at 5 p.m. and then I would fall asleep at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and then wake up again at 5 a.m. to have like California PST clients. It was really, really difficult. I lived on this beautiful island. I lived right next to the beach. I was working remote. It should have been my dream scenario, but something was still missing for me. And what that thing that was missing is I have always wanted more children, and my ex-husband did not. He was very adamant that he didn't want more kids. I did, and it was something that I was suppressing for a very long time. And, you know, I ended up coming back here to the US. We ended up filing for an amicable divorce because I just have to hold true to that vision of being a mother to more children, because, you know, life is very short. And, you know, I'm teaching a lot of lessons here for this audience. I'm 34 years old. And I know a lot of people who are in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s, and they always say one of their life regrets was not executing on something that was deep down in their soul that they kept ignoring. And I didn't want to be one of those people. So I am currently back in the US, and I am still working at Browning Associates, and my life is just continuing to unfold before me. And it's so interesting because once I let go of that marriage and I committed to following my path, my soul's calling of having more children, my career has just absolutely exploded. So in correlation to leaving something behind, it just really, it was like a slingshot, like forward in my career with all these things that are just falling into place for me. And going to Thailand, I lived there for a whole year. I can attest that that time in my life, taking that major risk in traveling, because my family did think I was crazy. They were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't even know. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm being called to do this. But that time in my life, taking that risk, was the clarity I needed to listen to what my soul was nagging at me for 8 years. So it was a wonderful experience.
And kind of just to go back with your schedule, working kind of US hours in Thailand. So you did that for a whole year.
Yep.
With just like 3 hours of sleep at night, and maybe you'd probably nap a little bit during the day.
Yes.
How did you make that work? I know you said it's incredibly difficult, but how did you make that work for you?
Back to something I said earlier on this episode about if you take the time to think too much about how crazy things are that you're juggling, you can make excuses. And I felt myself starting to really make excuses that it wasn't working. And I didn't want to do that because I'm a very disciplined person. So I kept saying to myself, just keep going, just keep going, just keep giving it more time. But that resentment of having to do that, it was there, and it was something I couldn't ignore any longer. I think the hardest part was I couldn't put my son to sleep at night. He was 6 at the time. I couldn't wake him up and take him to school in the morning, and I missed all his school events because that's the time pretty much when I was sleeping. That is not something I can ever excuse. And I could not excuse that any further because I feel like I missed out on a major component of my son's life that whole year because of my work schedule. So for me, I was no longer feeling like passion was driving that multitasking. And I came to the conclusion that it just was not for me.
Very cool. And then so you ended up selling, was also the process of buying property in a foreign country and selling property in a foreign country, was that pretty easy, or how was that? I know there's a lot of nomads out here that listen to this, me included. How was that process?
All right. So if you're wanting to purchase a house in Thailand, I'm going to give you the quick and dirty. Number one, you cannot purchase a house in Thailand as a foreigner. You have to be Thai. So the loophole around that is number two, you have to actually create a company. So I did that. Number three, as a foreigner, you cannot take out any bank loan. So if you want to buy a house, if you want to buy a car, it has to be in cash. And then lastly, because you're dealing with cash, you need to have a lawyer that you trust in Thailand because they have to be 50% owner of your company and you are going to be dealing in cash. I quite literally paid for my house with the largest bag of paper cash you could ever imagine in the back of a truck. So you have to make sure that how you're going about this, you're doing this with a Thai real estate agent that can sort of be like your broker for you and translate, because most likely the person that you're buying the house from is Thai. And then you need a good lawyer who is there to sign off on your paperwork and make sure that all the paperwork is legal. Without having people I could trust, I could not have done it. And without having all of the money in cash to buy my house, I could not have done it. Those are just things that are non-negotiable in Thailand.
Got it. And it sounds like, I was talking to you about this last week, you ended up getting a pretty good, for most people too, because if they purchase a property in Thailand, and you said that you owned it for a whole year, you ended up making a good ROI as well?
Yeah. So because I was on a tiny little island that is very up and coming, I was the only American on the island. My family, we were Americans on the island. It was mostly people from Europe, Australia, South America. People do not look at Americans quite highly. I was poked fun at quite often. They view us as very, very unintelligent. Not academically. The whole world recognizes that Americans are highly academically intelligent. I mean, we have some of the best law schools, the best medical schools here. When I say that they poked fun at me for the lack of intelligence is the whole world looks at us as if we have our heads buried in the sand and we don't know what's going on with politics. They think that our country is just a bunch of elites that are brainwashing us and poisoning us with food, and they think that Americans are unaware that this is happening. So they think that we're over here in America and we're just like, everything is perfect, we're the best, like we have the best government. They don't realize that the American people are actually very aware of the detriment that is going on in the country. So it was really nice to be over in Thailand to kind of be a voice for Americans and change the mind of a lot of Europeans and South Americans and things like that. But yes, so I was on a tiny little island, and there's only so much space on an island. Once land is built on, that's it. So as that island is starting to really become a predominant, and it's also very family oriented. Many kids, wonderful international school systems on that island. I can't thank the school systems enough for giving my son a wonderful private education while we were there for that year. But yeah, the return on investment, for those of you who might not know what ROI stands for, is substantial. Yeah, just flipping a house, not really doing much to it, but buying it and then flipping it. You can make anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 just by hanging on to it for a year. So yeah, if you're thinking about purchasing land over there or a home, you can absolutely reach out to me. I'm sure we're going to link my LinkedIn and my email in the description. So I'm open. I'm an open book when it comes to questions.
Definitely. Yeah, no, and I heard just in general, Thailand has really been blowing up since the
Yeah.
pandemic, so things are getting more expensive. So it sounded kind of like serendipitously everything worked
Yes.
out with your situation. But to go back to you know, kind of your executive coaching, how were you able to, I don't know how to say this, like kind of program or kind of develop and hone those skills of understanding and seeing yourselves in in like the shoes of an executive, and how were you able to kind of facilitate or kind of talk to these executives and understand exactly how they're feeling and kind of coach them on this? Because you yourself, I know that you have your own business, but um, I know you came from a teaching background. It's not like you were an executive at a Fortune 100 company. So how were you able to put yourselves in their shoes?
This might be shocking and maybe even to some degree insulting, but for me, from my perspective, as a coach and as a communication specialist, quite frankly, it did not matter.
Mhm.
The way that I work with an individual, I work with the total of who they are, and I really, really speak to the soul. So, let's say, for example, a client calls me and they say, listen, I was just in on a meeting and I was completely blindsided because the CEO said fill in the blank to me. Um, the
Mhm.
way that I coach and unravel any situation before I can even advise is understanding the emotional and energy dynamic of the situation. Everything is so situational. So working with my executives is really no different than how I would treat working with my group of high school students. We're all people at the end of the day, and we're all trying to figure out how to communicate with one another for optimal success. So much gets lost in business and in translation because people don't know how to, first and foremost, assess how they're feeling. And then a lot of people emotionally react because of how they feel. So let's say they are undermined in a meeting by the CEO. People have different responses to that. Some people may shut down. Other people might do what's on the other end of the spectrum, which is completely lash out and get defensive and cause a scene. Just because you're making $1 million a year does not exempt you from having or not having the emotional intelligence and communicative skills to be able to get through that initial like emotional shock. So a lot of how I advise executives, honestly, it really just comes down to understanding the dynamic of what's going on in any business situation. So, the CEO of an organization can call me to say, Brittany, I have this and this going on with my team. They're not getting along, two different personalities. I will sit there with them for an hour and completely dissect the energy dynamic of every person involved and then help the CEO strategize how to communicate with the team and move forward for optimal success. Because, like I said, a lot gets lost in translation with business because people react emotionally and don't know how to move forward past that.
I see. And then also to kind of go back when you're teaching, you started getting some coaching clients. It sounded like you really had a kind of a hockey stick curve of a buildup. I know some people, actually my sister included, she just started life coaching. I know a couple people in the Gilder community, they just started life coaching. How were you able to kind of have such a hockey stick curve of a growth when first starting out?
This is something that I just do very naturally. And it's just been this way my whole life because of what I was thrown into. But I am really exceptional at just being who I am. I mean, I wake up every day and I'm just so committed to being in my authenticity and following the path of my authenticity, no matter whose feelings I may hurt. Of course, I try not to hurt people's feelings, but I know who I am and I know what I deliver and I know what I don't deliver. So the hockey stick, I think, was my ability to be so authentic that I was never, ever giving a client a cookie cutter approach that I learned in a book, that I watched on YouTube. that I learned from a podcast. I didn't really find strategies anywhere because there are many good gurus out there who have wonderful life coaching strategies. That's not for me. That's not for me. I'm not looking to adopt anything from anyone else that someone else made. My business was really the essence of my soul and what I bring to the table. And if you come to me and we weren't a good match, that's totally okay. You never have to come back.
Sorry about that. I have no
What was the
idea
last
what is
thing you
going
heard me
on.
say?
So, so I heard just the hockey stick, and then it suddenly
All
just
right,
cut for some reason.
I'll
I
just
don't know
I'll
what's
just
going.
start
Could
somewhere.
be
You can splice
down
it
one of
together.
seconds.
So the hockey
Yeah,
stick, I can really, yeah,
yeah, definitely.
I can attest that hockey stick to being so committed to being in my
Hmm.
own authenticity. I know what I'm really good at doing. I was not at all
Hmm.
interested in adopting any type of strategies from any other guru out there doing what I was doing. I didn't learn it from YouTube. I
Hmm.
didn't learn it from a book. I didn't listen to it on a podcast. So anytime I had a client in front of me, it was, what is Brittany's soul meant to deliver this person? I never
Hmm.
pre-planned for a session. So I think my hockey stick curve of having such an inundation of clientele was word of mouth. And the word of mouth was,
Wow.
you have to see Brittany and give her a chance. Because, for example, I hear this all the time. I have gone to therapy for 5 years and I got 5 years worth of therapy in one session with Brittany than I did in 5 years of therapy. And I really think it's
Wow.
because I know what I deliver and I know what I don't. I never try to be something that I think the crowd needs. I am just myself, and I let the crowd
Hmm.
who resonates with that come to me. And that's a skill in and of itself to be able to surrender and trust like that. But
Right.
if you're a life coach or a coach of some sort and you're starting up a business, the best thing I can tell you to do is be very committed to standing in who you are without trying to bend and sway to what you think your audience needs. That is a trap that if you fall into, you are never
Hmm.
going to get out of it, and you're constantly going to be in that, lackful mindset, because you're constantly going to be like, where's my next client coming from? Who cares? Just show up and be
Hmm.
yourself. Your client is going to be your best marketing tool because they're going to go tell other people. But they're not going to tell other people if they feel like you're just the same as everyone else they've tried to see.
Got it. So you didn't do any type of SEO optimization. You didn't try to do any social
No,
media marketing. It was just all
not
organic
a
word of mouth.
single, not a
Wow.
single marketing tool. My mother would always call me. She's like my biggest cheerleader. She would always call
Hmm.
me and be like, I
Yeah.
see so and so marketing their coaching services on their Instagram. Why do you do that? Mom, it's because I'm so
Hmm.
busy that if I did market my services, these people can't book me. There's nothing on my calendar. Why would I market my
Hmm.
services? And that's the goal
Right.
is word of mouth, because then when you get clients, they are really excited to experience your authenticity and what you have to offer. And they have
Hmm.
this, I almost want to say they have this expectation of what they're going to get, but it's not really an expectation, because I try not to ever have expectations, go into it with an open mind. But
Hmm.
because someone who they love and trust advised them to come do a session with me, they were very hopeful. They come
Hmm.
to me very hopeful and open minded, which makes for a remarkable session.
Hmm. Got it. Very cool. And I do remember you first started out in kind of life coaching with people that would kind of have, difficulties, whether it's trauma. When did that shift happen to coaching executives, or how did that end up? How did you change from that to
Yep.
coaching
So I
executives?
knew that I was going to be moving to Thailand. And here in the US,
Hmm.
I had two locations for my business. So people could actually come see me in person. I for my personal business, I had clients all over the country, including Alaska and Hawaii, and I even started branching out to Europe. So most of my sessions were done remote, but I did have two locations. One, I had my own standalone building in my backyard in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and then I also had a standing location inside of a salon in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So, wait, well, I'm having like a major brain fart. Why was I?
You're good. You're good. Yeah. How did you transition from kind of life coaching trauma to
Yep, I would never
executives to
that never
executive
would have come
coaching?
back to me. All right, so um,
You're
so I
good. You're
had two
good.
locations. I knew that moving to Thailand,
Hmm.
I was going to lose the clients who love to come see me in person. So I networked and
Hmm.
I called Melissa Bassano. She is the co-host of my podcast called The Job Chicks, and she's the vice president at Browning Associates.
Hmm.
And I called her and I said,
Got
hey,
it.
like tell me a little bit more about Browning Associates and what you do, because I'm moving to Thailand. I'm going to lose some clientele that loves to only see me in person. And she was like, I think you'd be
Hmm.
perfect for this. She was like, and I'm pretty sure we have an opening. And here's the kicker. The universe is so funny. The kicker is that the only reason why there was an opening for me to come in as an executive career coach was because my now romantic partner, Dante Crowther, he was in that position and moved to a different position. All within, it was in
Oh,
like a
I see.
4 week period. He moved out of that role, and I had called Melissa, like the timing of it was perfect. And she was like, actually, we do need somebody. And I ended up, meeting him through work, falling in love with him, and
Hmm.
now he's my partner. So the whole thing is just really, really bizarre. Um, but yeah, that's how
Wow.
I fell into what I'm doing now. Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounded like everything serendipitously worked out with kind of the universe was
Yep.
speaking to you, Brittany. Um, it's fantastic having you on this podcast. Really appreciate your time. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so if you are an executive and you are at the VP or C suite level and you resonated with the things that I shared today, that is just simply scratching the surface of what Browning Associates offers. And, if you're not ready to embark on taking a journey that large with investing in Browning Associates, I highly recommend listening to my podcast called The Job Chicks. It is on uh, Spotify. And if you are someone who is looking for a life or spiritual coach at my level, you can send me a message on LinkedIn. I typically do those sessions on the weekends when I have some available time. So, all in all, I'm very happy to connect with people. So, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or shoot me over a question or a message, I would be more than happy.
That sounds fantastic, Brittany. I'll make sure that all that information's in the show notes, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a fantastic
Thank you
rest
so
of your day.
much.